One of the questions I'm asked a lot by students who are delving into the depths of Access is, what do I do when I have a field, say a field in one table that is its value could be limited by a field in another table? This especially happens when I may have a field in a child record that could be limited by a field in a parent record. Something like maybe a date in the child record that we want to have limited to a certain range based on a date that may be in the parent record. And it turns out there are ways to do this, and there's ways to do it even when they're not in a relationship with each other. And I'm going to demonstrate those ways in this next technique that I have. So I'm going to use the file S03-E02 data validations in subforms. And again, even though I'll be using subforms in this, it doesn't necessarily have to be a subform. You could be doing this across subject forms actually too, but it would require that the subject forms are both open at a given time. There is another way to do it in a subject form where it actually just reads directly from the table, and I'll show you those techniques right now. So I'm going to open up this one. And right away, just to level set, in case you're not understanding where I'm going with this right now. If you remember when we had the our vehicle database, and in the vehicle table, I had a date for when it was purchased and a date for when it was sold. If it is sold, it would have a sales date. And what I said is, now keep in mind, the purchase date was required in this, where the sales date was not required because we may still own the car, right? But in the case they were to put a value into sales date, you want to compare that to the purchase date and make sure that it's after it, or at least that same day or after, but not a date before it was actually purchased. So we have a table validation rule here that shows that the sales date has to be greater than and equal to the purchase date. And if it's not, we put a message on the screen that says the date must not precede the purchase date. Well, that works really well when you're working at the same level like this, where you have uh, you're entering those dates into the record at the same time, basically, or just the purchase date and then keeping the sales date null. But what happens when you have child records? For instance, we have a situation where we have vehicles that have expenses. And on the expenses, we had dates. Now, if you remember, I'll open up the relationship so you can see it. I have a vehicle, and vehicles can have expenses, and one of the fields on this is the expense date. Well, wouldn't it make sense for the expense date to come after the purchase date? Wouldn't I want to limit it to have that? At the same time, this is a case where I probably could say, well, the expense date really ought to be between the purchase date and the sales date. But since I may not have a sales date, I don't want to consider that end of it. I only want to consider the data that I actually know I have, and I will have data for the purchase date. So I would really want something on this, have something that would basically say a validation rule on this field that says make sure that this date is greater than whatever that purchase date was. Okay, and it turns out that you can do that through the validation rule for the field. You don't need it on the table here. You do it on the field. And let me show you how I did that. So I'm going to go over to vehicle expense and open it up in design view, and then go over. Now I should start with this. I'm going to go to the expense table, the vehicle expense table, open up, and you'll see that there's the expense date, but you'll see I don't have a validation rule on here. All right. You don't do this validation rule here. You do it on the form. All right. Uh, I've tried to make it work from a table. It doesn't do that very well. Okay. It actually could cause problems. So I found out the way to do this is actually do it on the validation rule for the control that's bound to that field. So I'll go over here to this one where it says vehicle expense date. So this is the subform. This is the supplemental form that I've created that will be dropped into the master form for the vehicle. And I look at that expense date and I go down to the validation rule, and you'll see this validation rule. Now, this did not come from the table, All right, this is something I wrote directly here on this control. Remember, I told you in inheritance you could override values. Okay, in this case, there was nothing inherited here anyway, so I'm just making that happen here. And I'm basically saying between, and then I have a reference basically to the control on the master form that has the purchase date in it. That's this one right here. If I go to the master form vehicle and open that up in design view, and I look at its purchase date. Where is the purchase date on here? Oh, it's right here. I gotta go to tab purchase date. I look at this one, and it's got this name that's DTM vehicle dash purchase date. Now I could have made that CTX if I wanted to. I usually would do that if I'm referring to it, but this is a unique name, so I'm going to just use this as it is. All right. So DTM vehicle dash purchase date. That's the name of the control. So what I do back here then on the validation rule for the date, and again I'm going to have to go down there because I moved up on the property sheet. I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can see it better. You have between, and then I have to actually put the full reference to that control. So again, I could go in there and do the ellipse and let it help guide me into making this reference. Okay, but I basically say in the form vehicle, FRM vehicle, I have a field DTM vehicle dash purchase date. And so I want my value to be, that goes in here, to be between that date and now. In other words, today's date. And I could have said date here. I didn't have to say now. Either one would work. The expense date cannot precede the vehicles. I spelled that wrong. I should have vehicle, vehicle. I'm sorry about that. Vehicles purchase date or exceed today's date. So I gave it a nice little message that you can put on the screen then. All right. And that will basically do it then for that field. I will only be able to put in, it will go out and figure out what purchase date it was, and gotta remember that's on the screen at the same time as this, because this is a subform. It has in the master form, it's got that control. Even though it's in a tab that you're not seeing it, it's actually in there on the form, on the master form. So we can refer to its value. So let me go in there and open up the vehicle form. We'll see how this works then. So there's my vehicle form. Let's go to form view now. And I've got the purchase date, and you can see that the purchase date for this one, Mom's Lemon, was 12/1/1999. And I'll go in there and hit the expenses, and I'll come down here and I'll put a new expense in here just so we can see how this works. So I'll say 2010 insurance, and that's the only one that's required. I'll just pick someone here just because insurance. And then I go in here. Now it's got today's date as default. That's fine. I can have that and go on, and that wouldn't violate the rule because it's today. Let's violate the rule. Let's go out in the future. Today's date is 11/3/2020. I'm going to make it 11/15/2020, and you cannot exceed it, and it cannot precede it. Okay, that was in 1999. I'll make this, let's make it really weird. Let's make it 1920. Okay, now that's way before it. And again, I got the error message. But if I came in here and did 11/01 2017, say, oh, wait a minute. The value entered isn't value for this. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on 91 right there. That's right. Okay. There's only 31 days at the most in a month. So November is only 30. So anyway, that worked. Okay. So it did the job for me. It actually validated this when I put that in there. Now again, that did not happen back at the table. It happened here at the form, but that's fine. This is what we're going to be managing our data with, is this form. So that works. Now I've got some others in here. Okay. I've got service here. And on the service one, remember that's a many to many, okay, is bound on the service activity. I've got a mechanic that's providing services, and I could have multiple mechanics providing services, and I could have multiple vehicles. So there's a many to many between my vehicles and my services. So I've got a subform, a junction subform on this one, and I also have it back on the mechanics. Okay, now Again, because the service date is in the same form as this one, I could use the exact same thing, the exact same validation rule there. In fact, I've done that there. If I go to service here and I go make a new one, Premiere, and I go out beyond this date, you'll see that I'll get an error message. First off, I got to put a valid field in there, valid value in there. Let's make it 08. There we go. And it should say, yeah, error. Okay. But if I keep it, and again, if it's less than 1999, I should get an error. Yes. But if it's between the purchase date and now, then I don't get an error. Yeah. Okay. So, of course, I would need another required here, but I'm not going to mess with that. I'm just going to get out of it. So, it worked exactly the same. It was exactly the same validation rule. It's just that it's on a different uh, control of a different form, this form. All right. But what about when I go to mechanic now? All right. When I go to mechanic form and open up the services and I type this in, the purchase date of the vehicle isn't on this form anywhere. It's not anywhere on the master form. So what do I do in that case? Well, turns out what I can do is I can do what's called a delookup of the table. Now, I have to warn you, sometimes this is a function, and sometimes when you have a lot of data to search through, it can get slow. And I mentioned DLOOKUP when I did the truth maintenance, when we actually used it there for putting a label on the screen that told me what make and model my car was in the wizard. All right, but I'm going to use it here now to limit the service date, what the service date could be from the mechanics junction form for the service. All right, so I'm going to go back here and I'm going, first off, I'm going to open that up in design view so you can see it. And I'm going to go here and you'll see the service date field. I just highlighted that. I know it's hard to see, but I just highlighted that text box. And now when I go down to the validation rule, you'll see it's a lot different. Okay, I say it's between this DLOOKUP stuff and now. All right, so what's in that DLOOKUP function? Well, there's three parameters and they're all strings, so you have to double quote them, okay? And what I want to do is I want to look up the purchase date from the table TBL vehicle where the primary key value of the record is equal to the vehicle record identifier. This from the combo box vehicle record identifier. So I've got a record identifier for the vehicle right here. I'm sorry, a combo box that is the CBO for the vehicle right here. If I look at that, you'll see that I've named it. If I go up to I just highlighted the vehicle's combo box. If I go up to the top there, you'll see that I have referenced it CBO vehicle dash record identifier. So what it's saying is it's going to go. I'm back on the service incident text box now. What that's going to do is, am I really there? Oh, I'm on the incident. I want to go to the date. I'm sorry. On the date, what that's going to do is it's going to look up that purchase date for that vehicle that I'm working on. So it's going to get the vehicle identifier, the primary key from it, value from here, right? Because the combo box is bound to the primary key in the vehicle, even though it's showing the name of the vehicle, it's bound to the primary key. All right, and so I'm going to find where the record identifier, that aught star dash record identifier, equals to whatever that is. And see, it's treated as a variable. That's passing back as a variable and then becoming part of the string, concatenated to become part of that string that's being passed to that function. And that will isolate that value then. And then it'll say and now. All right. And that basically gives me my range then of what the date can be. So I'm going to cancel that. Now, somebody asked me on the other ones, could I have done DLOOKUP there too? Yeah, you could have done the same thing on the other ones if you wanted to. You would have to. You'd have to be able to get the vehicle record identifier, and you should have that. That should be one of the fields actually that you have in the thing. So, and remember, there is a control that's hidden to you that's behind this. It actually holds that vehicle record identifier. I think it's called CTX star dash record identifier. You could always use that if you want to find the record identifier. So, but you could have done the D lookup on the other ones too, and it would work. But the referencing of of the control that actually had the purchase date, that was only true in the other one because it was in the master for that one. It isn't available here, so we had to use DLOOKUP to make it work here. And I'll go out there and I'll run it just to show you that it actually worked. So I got to service now, and maybe servicing mom's heap. And I'm going to say a date that's beyond today's date. I'll just make it another year. And I get it. Oh, that's way out there. I can't do that. Maybe it was in 1921, which is way too early. And yeah, I can't do that. But if I make this 2003, that was after the purchase date and before today. Oh, I got to enter an incident. Yeah, I know. Crash. And now I can do it. Bam, I've saved the record. So that's kind of a nice way. Again, you can usually reference beyond the form you're in if the other form is open. But if the other form is closed, then you have to go directly to the table and retrieve that. And the way to do that is to use the DLOOKUP function. It is probably the function I use the most next to the date function. In the form, I guess I use format quite a bit too, but DLOOKUP I use a lot when I need to get a single value back from the database. Now, some people might ask, and by the way, I should go back to that DLOOKUP and explain the parts to it, just in case you didn't get that. I know I did that in the other video, but I may as well do it here too. The parts of the DLOOKUP are the fields, the value you want to return. So whatever field that is, you want to put that in there. So I wanted to bring back the purchase date. Okay, that's really what I want to have to be resolved basically in this expression, the purchase date. Then you have to say where it's located, okay, and it's in the vehicle table. All right, now sometimes you'll see where I've actually got the vehicle table referenced here too. You could do that. You could have the whole reference here, but usually this is just enough. You could put the name, you could put the name of the field, and of course it has to be in square brackets. And then the name of the table, which isn't in square brackets. That used to throw me a lot. I used to think it all needed to be square brackets, but it doesn't. And then you have to build the string that basically amounts to the criteria. This is like the where part of it, where the aught star dash record identifier field is equal to whatever value is bound to this field at the time, or that this control evaluates to. Okay, so if it was 1, it would equal to 1, and then close that out, and then so that's the first part of your between, and then in the upper end of it is now, or it could be date, right? So that's how you build it. Not difficult to do. If you have trouble with it, I just recommend that you go out and Google DLOOKUP access or DLOOKUP function access, either one of those, and it'll come back with a lot of examples of how to do this. So, and again, one of the great things is because we used our naming convention, it's a lot easier to find things. If you want to use this expression builder, it'll help you actually build some of this. So, anyway, that is how you allow validation in fields based on values that are in other tables. And so one of the things I use quite a bit, especially again when I do master-child relationships, I use them quite a bit. Now, again, could it work across forms? Yeah, if somehow you had forms open at the same time, you could do it. Okay, you could reference a control in another form. But the easier way I think to do it is to use the DLOOKUP function when it's really in another table that you don't have access to, yeah, or that you don't have access to from a control that's in a form. You just go directly to the table and bring it out. The other thing I should point out too, I used a value that came back from a table. Okay, you could also use a value that's coming back from a query. You just, instead of having a TBL vehicle, if I had a query that had this information in it, I could actually reference the query, but then you'd have to have the query object in here to do it too. So that's that technique. I think it's a neat one. I think it's a powerful one. And again, several of you have asked me throughout the semester, how do you do something like that? And I've told you, wait till the end, I'll show you how to do that. Well, this is how you do it. So thanks a lot, and I'll go on to some other technique next.